可再生能源规模令人震撼，给世界带来了巨大机遇。接下来，我们将结合中国产业链优势，在中国通过合资方式布局未来投资。
商品和休闲度假等等。Back in 2024 last year, China climbed to 11th place in the Global Innovation Index and led the way with 26 science and technology.
欢迎继续收听新闻有观点，我是方亮。接下来。
Very rapidly over the years, and I can give you one example, which is a shining example of how the global pattern landscape has changed over time. For example, in the cellular space, we all know that the standard 3G, 4G, 5G standards. China used to be on the licensing side, which means that China pays royalties for those what are called standard essential patents. Today, out of the 5G standard, the largest share of patents is the top 25, holding about 14% of the total standard essential patents worldwide related to 5G. So this is a very good example to show that China's intellectual property is expanding quite rapidly.
Mm-hmm. It's not just about quantity.
Слово на сегодня. Хунли, свадьба.
Малин, я вчера был на китайской свадьбе. Хунли. Так было интересно.
А у кого была свадьба?
Женился мой китайский друг. Рано утром мы с ним поехали забирать невесту. Сначала нас не пускали в ее дом. Жениху пришлось заплатить выкуп ее подругам и отгадать их загадки. Только после этого мы смогли увидеть невесту.
Это один из китайских свадебных обычаев. А, например, на юге Китая невесте принято горько оплакивать свой уход из родного дома. Это символизирует ее печаль перед разлукой с родителями.
Когда мы вернулись в дом жениха с невестой, новобрачных встречали оглушительным фейерверком. Невеста была одета в красное традиционное платье. На голове у нее была красная фата.
Одной из самых главных на китайской свадьбе является так называемая церемония 3 поклонов. Сначала молодожены совершают поклоны небу и земле, затем родителям жениха и, наконец, друг другу.
Да, я все это видел. Кстати, молодожены должны были еще съесть сладкое блюдо, приготовленное из семян лотоса и фрукта лонган. Что это блюдо означает?
Это специальное свадебное кушанье. Оно символизирует надежду на скорое рождение детей.
А уже в полдень началось грандиозное свадебное застолье. Было приглашено несколько сотен гостей.
Считается, чем больше гостей, тем торжественнее свадьба Хунли.
Sladká moje holuboké, zakoření portugalské gužlí na mnoha místech Maká. Usadilo se zde na portugalsky a dovolilci dělat.
最终的责任，那么从公平原则的角度出发，免得谁ومسان جغرافيا يزندل جغرافيا ده ولاد دلارة ده ده سوق في رقابتنا شغله وكل دي مثل شغله شغله ومسان ده بس أقول كي مقاطعته ويسيا وده غفر.
Of course, none of this happens in a vacuum. How much of these achievements can be linked to China's expanding international cooperation in the field of IP?
Yeah, well, I think as Chinese companies are moving more and more from a licensee position to a licensor position, meaning that they are actually owning intellectual properties and granting others for usages of these intellectual property rights in return, of course, for monetary compensation. As they shift more towards that position, naturally, I think the entire country's policy has been shifting towards more strengthened protection of intellectual property rights. And this calls for certainly international cooperation with major intellectual property rights generating countries, as well as economies and countries that have been heavy users of intellectual property rights. So when we say cooperation, it happens on both ends, and this is happening in accordance with Chinese companies expanding overseas as well.
Mm-hmm. On that note, China joined the Hague Agreement in 2022 and has been playing a leading role in pushing forward initiatives worldwide. So from your perspective, what practical benefits do such international efforts bring for Chinese companies aiming to go global?
Well, I think the first benefit is that China's economy is becoming more like a knowledge economy. The intensified and the strength and protection of IPR rights are certainly in the interests of Chinese companies and in general the Chinese economy. I think the practice of Chinese companies participating in these standard-setting organizations, which eventually generates a lot of intellectual property rights, is a development that represents the stage of China's economic development. In this area, actually, there's more cooperation, in my view, between Chinese companies and Western companies, as opposed to the sort of the intense competition between China and the United States, for example, on a geopolitical arena. In a sense, we can still argue that globalization, at least in the joint development of standards and intellectual property rights, are still very much happening right now.
China has been deepening IP cooperation not only with developed economies like the United States and Europe, but also with partners across BRICS, ASEAN, Central Asia, and Africa. How do you see the priorities or models of cooperation among these regions, and how do these efforts contribute to China's broader strategy of high-level opening up?
It's not so much in conflict. I think the general rule is that the IPR protection is associated with where these value-added facilitated by intellectual property rights is taking place. As Chinese companies expand overseas, they expand into these developing countries. They set up manufacturing facilities. The countries derive sales from these countries, these economies. Naturally, there will be a need for deriving IPR rights from these operations, from these activities, and the basis for that is to have these patents filed in these countries and economies. So I think it's not surprising to see that Chinese entities and companies are investing in these patent filings to essentially enable these countries to replicate China's model in the past from basically a licensee type of economy to a more of a licensor type of economy. So that's the path that China has gone through in the past. And we're seeing this in developing countries as well. So that's a general rule in my view. And I would not be surprised to see this kind of a development.
Finally, looking ahead, next year will mark the start of China's 15th five-year plan. What should we expect to see in terms of IP priorities? Are there any emerging policy trends that we should keep an eye on?
We're generally moving in that trend. Chinese companies
giữ gìn phẩm chất đạo đức, lối sống, rồi mới có thể quản lý đất nước.
ورسمها بالتكنيكي لهذه مشكلات زيادة أو تصل الصليب مشكلة غادي في أفغانستان دي وكامل حقوق دولة بهاي بين لي دقر كي دي أفغانستان دي ملات دي حق خدفانيش كولي مثلا نوسمانغا دي بين لي مالي سيستمون خبيبار خيوده